What's going on, everyone? So, I thought I'd do something a little different today and give my spoiler fueled thoughts of the new Hellboy film. I saw this one last night. I've been dwelling on it for a bit this morning, and I think I'm ready to unleash my thoughts on what I think of Hellboy. Um, I was relatively excited for this film. I really liked the trailer. I liked the cast. I liked the director. Um, Directed by Neil Marshall, who directed The Descent, which is one of my favorite horror films of this century so far, I guess you could say. David Harbour's work on Stranger Things is iconic at this point, and I think he was perfect casting as Hellboy. And yeah, I was all on board. And then I went and saw the movie, and yeah, I'm a bit conflicted, and I think I need to discuss and just vent on what my thoughts are on this film. So a little backstory with me and Hellboy. The Del Toro films from 2004 and 2008. I'm not a huge fan of them as far as you can't touch these films. They're masterpieces. I'm not like that. I think that they're good and I enjoy watching them. I own both of them on Blu-ray. And I think Ron Perlman's fantastic as Hellboy, but I don't think this material is very. I don't think it's untouchable. I think that any filmmaker could come in and do something with it, and I think that's what Neil Marshall's done. The film was going to be directed by Del Toro, a third film in that series, but he wanted $150 million to $200 million to make it. Universal said, nah, that's not happening. So then the rights for the film were up for grabs. Lionsgate came in, took them, and 2 years later, we have a Hellboy film. It was a pretty rushed process, but at the same time, you've got these rights, do something with them. Comic books are all the craze at the moment. Let's see what we can do. And yeah, that's where we're at. So let's just duck into this one. The film's directed, as I mentioned, by Neil Marshall, stars David Harbour as Hellboy, Ian McShane, Mila Jovovich, Sasha Lane, and Daniel Day Kim. So the basic outline or plot outline of this film is that an evil queen, which from 517 AD, I think it's said at the start of the film, is pretty much decapitated, and all of her limbs cut and by Merlin and King Arthur. Pretty much, she's all over the country, locked in these chests, and once that she's restored, she can raise the underworld, and the underlings can take over the world. Pretty much that's the thing. She introduced the plague in 517 AD and we're killing everyone, and then King Arthur and Merlin are like, nah, her sister betrayed her, and yeah, here we are. So that's pretty much the basic plot outline. It is based on the Mike Mignola Hellboy series for Dark Horse Comics, as everyone would know. And yeah, that's pretty much the story. So like I mentioned, I was excited for this film, and when it started, I thought something was a little off. Ian McShane's narrating a battle and saying who this evil queen is, and what her wrath was, and how King Arthur wanted to take her down. And the narration was out of place, and I didn't think it really needed to be there. You could have started with just that opening battle scene showing King Arthur and Merlin taking her, cutting her down, and then cut to present day. You didn't need the narration, and I think narration is one of the laziest plot devices used in a film. It has its place. It definitely has its place, but here it feels very lazy, very misguided, and I just don't think it needed to be there. And I knew something was off from that opening beat. We then cut to present day, where we have Hellboy having a conversation with his father, played by Ian McShane, in Tijuana, Mexico. Rock music's playing in the background, and we have an overhead crane shot cutting in as Hellboy pulls up at a curb. The film, it's poorly edited. This crane shot is cutting over this car pulling up to a curb, but it overshoots and then it cuts down, and it's hard to explain, and it's a very, very nitpicky, but it was very lazy and it just irritated me. Then we have another thing that proves the laziness of this film. Whilst he's on the phone to his father, we see that the iPhone is on the passenger side of the car. Hellboy is talking to his father already, but on the screen it says dad and has accept and decline. So the screen that would show if someone was calling you, not if you're already speaking to someone. That to me is just lazy, because they obviously had the rights to use an iPhone because they had the layout and everything. Why can't you just show like a proper phone call? Like, I don't understand that form of laziness in a film. I just think it's very stupid, and it irritates me because, yeah, it's something that's so minute, but it's something that takes you completely out of the film once you're in there. The opening fight scene is between Hellboy and his friend, who's been possessed by some demon, and he kills his friend, and it's like this emotional scene, but it is so comical the way that it's edited and put together. The fight scene is piss poor, and it just irritated the hell out of me. And when I was watching it, I was thinking, this can't be real, surely. Not in this day and age. We had Robin Hood by Lionsgate last year that did the same sort of thing, where it was just poorly executed and just poorly done. And here, they've done the same thing with Hellboy. We've got this fight scene that belongs in early 2000s Marvel attempts like Daredevil or Elektra. Like, this is just, it was baffling to me. The plot keeps going along, and we get introduced to more characters. Agent Ben, played by Daniel Day-Kim, who most of you will know as Jin from Lost. His performance is awful in this film, and it's very over the top, and I don't know what Neil Marshall was telling him to do, because it just does not fit the tone of the film at all. And he's partnered them with Alice, who is Hellboy's friend from, like, they've known each other long back. She's a medium who can speak to the dead, and all three of them team up to take down this Blood Queen. The film is so convoluted. It has so many things that it wants to do, but it just has no clear narrative path. We have these long portions of the movie where we've stopped to hear narration and backstory and rules all set up to create this flow of this film, but it is to the service of nothing. We don't really get the necessary backstory that we need in the way that it should be told. Instead, we're throwing all this information and we've got to process it whilst we're moving to the next scene. So it's tiring to watch, and there's so much being thrown at you that so much going on. The film jumps location to location so many times as well, and I think it's not to the service of the film either. I'm happy for locations to jump. A lot of great films do it. Star Wars, Star Trek. We jump from these locations, and it's in service of a story. I'm happy for globetrotting, and in here it's more like just trotting around the continent, because they don't really move out of Europe. And I'm happy for that to happen, but it has to be in the service of something. Something has to come from it. Instead, it's just so we can have an action sequence here in a field in Wales, and then cut to Tijuana, Mexico, and then we're in London, and then we're just all over the place, and there's no focus. And I think if a few of these sequences were cut out, then some of the backstory could be trimmed as well. Lionsgate are treating their audience pretty stupidly here. They don't have much faith that they understand what's going on, but it's a pretty basic story. Evil witch queen needs to be put back together. She'll bring up the underworld to take down human race, just so that the underlings can run rampant. She needs Hellboy because it's fate the two of them are together. Hellboy needs Excalibur because he's the bloodline of King Arthur. Like, all of this is in this one movie, and it just doesn't need to be there. I think that if they focused the narrative, they could have cut at least 20 minutes off the film. It goes for 2 hours and 12 minutes, I think, or a bit less than that. It's so long, and it doesn't need to be long. The film's edited very poorly as well. So many scenes are just cut quickly. There's awful audio dubbing over the top of previously recorded dialogue that would have been done during principal photography. And then in post-production, they've added all this ADR, and it just sounds garbage. And it's so noticeable. Like, I was watching and I thought, that's ADR, that's ADR, that's ADR. It was just so poorly done. And I don't understand how the screen executives are watching this and thinking, oh, yes, this is fantastic. Oh, we've done such a great job. Greenlight the sequel. They did the same sort of thing Lionsgate did with Power Rangers, where they jumped the gun, announced sequels and whatnot, and the film itself wasn't fantastic. Power Rangers is a much better film than Hellboy, but I feel that Hellboy had the makings of something there, and because Neil Marshall's directing, I feel that Marshall would have directed a different film than what has been executed. It's a classic case of studio meddling. Now, this is just me hypothesizing because who knows, this could be Neil Marshall's vision and this is what he wanted. But seeing the films that he's directed with The Descent and Dog Soldiers, which is a underrated horror action film as well, I feel that he knows what he's doing behind the lens, and he's a very creative director. He uses a lot of nuance to his direction, a lot of creativity and a lot of visual flair. Here, there's all of that lacking. There's no real visual flair, and the visuals that are there are quite poor. The CGI is garbage. It's some of the worst CGI I've seen in a major motion picture in I don't know how long, probably since Green Lantern. For a film that has a budget as big as what this film does, I'm going to look up the budget now because I'm going to say that it was... Apparently it's $50 million, and that's before advertising costs. $50 million movie should not be looking like this. It should look a lot better. Some of the makeup effects are good. I think the makeup on Hellboy himself looks fantastic, except there was one scene towards the start of the film where he's filing off some of his horns as they're growing back, and you see the horn moving on David Harbour's head, and it cuts away pretty quickly because they've obviously probably noticed it, I'd say. It just looked very poor. But yeah, I just think that this film needed more time to develop. I feel that they needed to take a lot of these elements out to just introduce the character back to us. We haven't seen Hellboy on the big screen for 11 years now, so I think slowly integrate him back into moviegoers' minds and rather trim down the story so it's just simple. Blood Queen evil, Hellboy kill. Like, we don't need to know that he's the bloodline of King Arthur and introduce Merlin. The Merlin scene, so I'm going to discuss this quickly. I'm going off on tangents and I'm sorry. I'm nearly as unfocused as what this narrative is. We cut to a scene where our three heroes are going off to this cave because Alice has got this... Alice is the medium, by the way. She's got this thorn that was thrown from the Blood Queen into her neck, and they need to remove it, otherwise she's going to die. So they take her to this cave, and Merlin is resurrected from the grave. They don't really explain that, but they explain everything else in great detail. But Merlin's back, whatever. He removes the thorn out of her neck, and she's all good. And he puts Ben and her to sleep, and then we cut to Merlin giving this exposition about how this baby was born in hell and stuff, and we're like, yeah, okay, we get it. That's Hellboy. Then we find out that Hellboy is the descendant of King Arthur, which is just ridiculous. And then, yeah, we're then showing Excalibur, and Hellboy has to pull Excalibur from the stone, but then he has a vision that if he pulls Excalibur from the stone, then he will kill humanity because he's the apocalypse. And so it's just a lot of craziness and zaniness, which works for this universe. Don't get me wrong. Him as King Arthur's... I'm not sure if that's what happens in the comic book. I'm not really familiar, but if that's what happens, that's fine. But I think for the context of this film, it's just too much to be thrown at the audience to sort of sit on. And because the narrative is moving at such a pace, we don't really have time to really ponder these things and piece it together. It's just thrown at us just so like rapidly, and it's just, yeah, it's a lot to take in. I'm going to talk about the villains quickly. So Mila Jovovich plays the Blood Queen. She's appropriately hemi for the film. I feel like she works in the context of the film, but I think it's bordering on the so bad that it's good kind of vibe. She has a lot of these facial expressions that just look like they're straight out of a B movie from the 80s. I'm okay with that because, like, yeah, I'm not a big fan of Mila Jovovich's work, but when I have enjoyed her, like in The Fifth Element, it has been when she's been a bit more hemi and a bit more crazy, and I think she gets to do that a little here, and I think that's where she shines. Another villain we have is like her henchman, which is, I'm just going to call it the Pig. I think that villain was actually kind of more entertaining. His reasoning for wanting to kill Hellboy is ridiculous, but it's also quite funny, and I think it fit well with the tone of the film. Um, and I would have liked to have seen more of him, but instead we have this fight scene between him and Hellboy in a cathedral, and Hellboy and then Blood Queen kills him because she needs Hellboy and her to be teammates to take down the world because it's fate. And it's thrown into the film so quickly, but we have this setup for this character, and then it just completely evaporated from existence, and kind of literally as well when he dies. And I thought that was kind of weak, but nonetheless, the villains were okay and they were serviceable to the plot. As I mentioned, the CGI sucks, but there is a scene where these giants raise from underneath, after she's complete, the Blood Queen's complete. Hellboy gets Excalibur, he's got his horns back and he's ready to go. All the underlings from, I keep calling them underlings, I don't know if that's what they're called, but that's what I'm going to keep calling them. They come up from under the ground and they start taking over London and just like killing, and it's very gruesome and bloody, and a lot of the violence in that scene felt very unnecessary. I don't think it needed to be as violent as it was because it didn't show mass carnage. Instead, it was just the violence of and the murder of very few people. I found that to be a bit strange, and it sort of didn't really work for me. I'm okay with R rating in film, and in the Australian context, we don't really have that many R-rated films released into cinemas. We have MA15+, which is the equivalent of the American R rating to a certain extent. So this is the second R-rated film I've seen in a couple of years. Overlord was R-rated last year, and I quite enjoyed that film, but it wasn't senseless violence. The violence felt like it fit into the story. Where here it is a bit senseless. It doesn't serve to a greater point. It just exists because it's R-rated and we can have violence in a film. I just don't think that it really mattered all that much, and I don't think that it really was in service of the story, and it just felt very out of place, and I don't really think it needed to be there. Excessive violence, that is. I'm okay with a bit of blood and gore. There's a fight scene earlier in the film where Hellboy versus these three giants, and whilst the CGI is quite poor, the action scene itself was a bit of fun. There's noticeable green screen, but it is a bit fun in the way that the camera moves. It was exciting, and it was the best action scene probably in the film. And there's a lot of blood and gore in that sense, but it showed Hellboy's powers, and that was the first time we saw him really fight, apart from the opening scene. So I enjoyed that, and I think that's gore used appropriately in service of the plot. But yeah, and that sort of, I suppose, it's dependent on that sort of thing is dependent on who the audience member is, because someone might enjoy it, someone might hate it. I myself did not like the excessive violence because I just didn't think it worked very well in the overall narrative and the film. It just felt out of place. I want to talk a bit about the music choices in the film. When I watch an action film like this, there's always going to be like a rock song or something play in the film. I'm okay with that, and I think this appeals to the metalheads who like the Dark Horse brand of comic. They're not your typical Marvel or DC comic lovers, though. DC has used rock and pop music quite excessively in their films. Suicide Squad, for example. Here, rock music is used. I would say it's excessive. Every time we cut to a different city, it was the same exact establishing shot where they would do the 3-frame. It's like a rom-com would do. The 3-frame shot of the city. Normally like a bridge, cars going over a bridge, skyline, and then cut down to the city. It was doing it each time that we went to a city. It was doing the exact same thing, but with a bombastic rock song playing. And did we not learn anything from Suicide Squad? And one of the biggest complaints in that movie is, whilst it had a good soundtrack, it did not service the actual film. In that opening scene from Suicide Squad, we had like 7 pop songs play. Here, it's like they're trying to match it. There's like 3 in the first 5 minutes, and it was just very, very obnoxious and annoying. And I'm okay with a rock song playing every now and then, but not all the time. I just don't think it works. I don't understand that choice. And I remember when Suicide Squad came out, that was a huge complaint, and I was one of them who thought, yeah, this is out of place and very, very annoying. It just doesn't fit. So I was not a big fan of that. But I mean, if you like rock music, then maybe you'll like that. But yeah, guys, I did not love Hellboy. I think it is a film that has a lot going for it, but a lot working against it as well. I think in the grand scheme of things, I'm not going to remember it. I think it's just a throwaway film. There was not a lot I loved. As soon as the film ended, I was uncomfortable and just wanted to leave. If there was an after credits scene, it was lost on me because I did not stay. I feel a bit bad for Neil Marshall because I do like him as a director. And again, if the studio haven't meddled in this, then I apologize for calling out Lionsgate. But studio meddling is becoming increasingly prevalent in these big blockbuster films. So I just assumed. But yeah, David Harbour's probably the best part of the film. And despite a few action sequences, I was not a huge fan. So basically, Hellboy is a big disappointment for me. Whilst there's glimmers of hope throughout, this convoluted mess struggles to balance the giant plot, characters, and backstory that come with the film. Should you see Hellboy? Hell no. Ha. Thanks guys for listening. I'll be doing a few more of these videos, or recordings, podcasts, whatever you'd like to call them. Vodcast, maybe, might be a better term. I'll be doing a lot more of these more frequently. I like being able to talk more freely about a film. I get a bit sort of all over the place, but I keep myself relatively on track. So I'm going to try and do more of these as time goes on. But I'd like to thank you all for listening and look forward to more content shortly. Thank you.